What's up guys, and welcome to the tier 3 modeling tutorial. So if you haven't seen reuse videos yet, make sure you check that out. On my side, we're going to be making some decals for this month. So you should have received a pack, all tiers. You're going to get 20 ridge decals, kind of like this. They're pretty cool. Make sure you grab those, download them, add them to your decal library. But I also thought it'd be pretty cool, since these are relatively simple, to show you exactly the process you would take to make and bake these decals. They're really easy to do, and you can get some awesome effects without having to add in all that extra unnecessary geo. These little ridges here are literally decals, so it's pretty cool, and you can get like these pipe formations and whatnot. Not too bad. Anyways, let's get started. So first things first, I was about to make the pipe again. Let's start with a plane. Now for decals, you always want to start with a plane. Reason being is because you actually have to have a plane as the baking surface on the origin point, or middle of the world origin right here. Very important stuff. You don't have to start with a plane. Oftentimes it's simply easier. I'm going to show you a few tricks to add a plane after the fact in case it gets tricky, but we'll kind of talk about that in these tutorials here. So first thing I want to do is just come in here. I'm going to make the ridge I just showed you a bit earlier, the same type. And what I want to do here is scale this. We're going to make this pretty thin because it's going to be a pretty thin decal. Do something like that. Actually, we could even hold control and just make it nice and consistent. Awesome. Control A, apply scale. Let me turn on screencast keys. There you go. And what I'm going to do is turn on the snap button up here in box cutter. Control, gonna kind of pan out and hold the Alt key and then just kind of cut through like this. Double click, and there we go. So now we kind of have this empty space right here, and since we haven't applied the boolean yet, let's go ahead and do that. What we can do is under ever scroll, we can Alt click to smart apply. That's a newer function, pretty awesome. And I just want to select these two edges right here. E to extrude. Extrude them down just a bit. Jeez, I'm losing my words, guys. Forgive me. I need my coffee this morning. Yeah, we're going to fill that in. It's a very basic piece, nothing complicated. And we're basically just going to Control B and just really ramp up the bevel count. Since this will be baked, the geo count does not matter at all. So really ramp this up, make it nice and smooth. And make sure you also sharpen it if you see ridges or anything. And this is precisely the type of decal I want. We have these nice little bevels going on, and this should bake pretty cleanly. So this is probably the most simple decal we can bake. I thought it would be a nice warm-up, so this should bake just fine. What we're going to do is hop into the machine panel. This is just like the about section. You can turn that off, turn on this little magic wand. You're going to see a few options in here. This looks pretty intimidating at first, especially if you don't bake that many decals or haven't before. Very simple. We want to create a decal. We want to create a simple decal. This is what you'll use most of the time. You have panels, which I rarely do. And you also have info decals, which is basically text. But most of the time you'll be using this one right here. Now, anti-aliasing. We're going to bake at the max settings in a second. But for now, I want to bake at 2 times anti-aliasing, 256. Resolution. Reason being is because this will bake in just a few seconds depending on your machine, and we want to make sure before we spend a few minutes baking at the max resolution that the decal actually comes out properly. So I never bake at full settings off the bat. So we can go ahead and bake it. We're going to go into material mode, otherwise you won't be able to see it. Click on create simple decal. This should be really fast. And then if we press / on the numpad, we can isolate the view, go into local, and see this decal bake just fine. And if we press Alt A to turn off that selection, you're going to see we have this. Now, we do have a small issue. Notice this kind of like baking ridge right here. And the reason we have this is because we actually have to make sure we have an outer plane for this decal. Otherwise, it has like an empty fall off, right? Let me show you. This empty fall off into the void right here will not bake properly. And I wanted to show you because I forget that sometimes, but yeah, this ridge isn't a huge deal, but I would recommend fixing it. So what we're going to actually do, we'll delete this decal. We're going to make a nice little outer plane, ridge, whatever, for this decal so that way it bakes just fine. So the easiest way to do this, if you have your model decal basically, and you need to make an outer plane for it, what you have to do is kind of steal the geometry, and I'll show you in a second. So right now we have the decal, we need to add in a plane for it. So add in a plane, I'm going to scale this a bit on the Y, I'm going to scale it a bit on the X. We want to make sure we have a nice little kind of border, enough of a border around it so that way the bake works fine. So maybe like a single unit or something, doesn't have to be too big. Like there's no need to have the outer plane this big because it's going to be a big waste. So just make it really nice and tight around that. So we have our plane. Now what we need to do is take this little decal right here and steal some of the geo. So we basically just want to select the boundary. So I'm going to isolate the view with / on the numpad. We're going to control click the boundary, turn off snap up here. Just control click the entire boundary here, Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel, and then P to separate by selection. And now we're going to have this, and all we really need to do is flatten this out. So if we go into edit mode, select everything, SZ0, that'll flatten it out. And then if you use machine tools, you can just press 3 to clean it up, but I think that'll delete the whole thing. So maybe we'll use a limited dissolve here by pressing the X key and hit it with limited dissolve, and we won't have these extra vertices right here. So pretty easy stuff. Now we'll go back into global view, and we're basically going to use this as a Boolean cutter on the main plane. So we'll press the F key to fill it in. We'll press E to extrude it down. We want to make sure this thing, the normals are flipped the right way, which they might not be, so Shift N just in case. And then if we just shift click on this and run a difference Boolean, we can apply that Boolean. And now we're basically going to have the cut that is the exact boundary of the decal, and this should work just fine. So what I want to do at this point is select the borders right here. We'll press E to extrude this down like that, and then press the F key to fill it. So now we kind of have like a box containing this thing, for lack of better term. So what I want to do is join these two together with Control J, and what we're going to need to do is merge any overlapping verts, so probably these together. And then what we can actually do is Alt X and then symmetrize like this, so that way we have a much better connection point through the middle instead of in the corners. So now what we could do, if we wanted to, we could drop a bevel, but the way this is connected is probably not the best idea for this decal. So we can go ahead and try to bake this thing. It should be just fine. So we'll go to create simple decal and give it a second. Go into material mode. And there we go. Now we actually have a decal that doesn't have that weird ridge on the back. The reason we don't need to bevel this thing, usually we bevel the decals, is because we already made a bevel manually on the main part of the decal, and this back part won't actually be baked at all. So yeah, we don't need to do that. Anyways, let me bring that decal back. And here's the decal, just fine. So what we could do to test it out is add in a cylinder. We'll go ahead and we don't need that many vertices. Sharpen it, rotate it, move it, and then we can of course add a new material to it. Drop a small little bevel, make it metallic, and now if we test out this decal, Shift D, and then hold Control, we can snap it here, as long as you have your face mode turned on under snap. Wrong one, right here, align rotation to target under face. You can basically just snap it there. So this will be alright. We'll go ahead and project the decal, and then simply run an array. Just like that. And now if we want to rotate this, like run a radial array around it, actually I want these to be a bit closer together, just because I think it would look cooler. There we go. And to run a radial array around it, we'll press Shift S, cursor to selected, and then in here we can just Control click on radial array, press the X key a few times if you need to, and we're going to have, might need to adjust this out just a bit. Basically we're going to have some ridge decals. Now there are limitations because these won't align up perfectly, so you might need to do the math on that, but overall it looks pretty cool. Next, let's go ahead and make a circular button type of decal. I actually made one for the pack for this month. This thing right here. It's pretty cool. It's like a, it's kind of indented upwards almost, and you can kind of see it's not completely flat. And this is a pretty cool effect for just general shaping on whatever object you have. Nothing crazy complicated. We could even add in a quad sphere and drop it on there. Just to show you. You know, you have something like this. We could scale it down. Put another one over here. Put another one over here. And then maybe run a radial array around it. We'll do that real quick. Actually, let me make sure these are all projected as well, because if you don't project them, you won't actually pick up that material color from the object you're working with. So anyways, I'll just do a quick demonstration. We could run a radial array and get these cool types of little button effects, whatever you want to call it. It's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and make that. So of course we need to start with the default plane. Not a default cube this time. This is like the first time I've said default plane. Feels nice to change things up. We're going to go to circle, and we'll use like 100 vertices because once again we don't care about the poly count when we're going to bake the decal anyways. So as long as your system can handle it, really ramp up that vertex count. You can't really see much beyond 100 anyways, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Anyways, we'll go into snap mode here. Gonna hold control, pull this out, cut that through. And then what I want to do, just to make sure we don't have any weird connection points, which we probably do have by default, is to simply run a symmetry. That'll drop a line straight through the middle, so now I won't have to deal with any nasty connection points. Alright, cool. So let's go ahead and control click on sharpen to apply that boolean. Alt shift click both these edges here. And then if we just extrude this down, we can fill that in maybe. Kind of like that. And now what I want to do to get that button effect, this is probably a bit too low, move this up. The lower you go, the deeper of a shadow you'll have in the bake, and oftentimes that can look worse rather than better. I'd recommend keeping this as high up as you can while still getting away with the size of the inside that you want. So for this piece around here should be okay. Let's go ahead and press Shift D to duplicate this face, right click, and then P to separate by selection. And now we'll have this outer border and this inner circle. So at this point, I want to delete out this face right here because it's one big n-gon. And if we try to do any sort of subsurf or manipulate more of the geo, we don't have any geo to really work with. We only have these outer vertices. So I'm going to press the X key and then delete only faces. So that way we still have the vertices here. And at this point, we can press the F3 key and search for grid fill. And hang on a second, it looks like my screencast keys are still off. There we go. Let's try this again, grid fill. And we can play with the settings here. Usually we should have some extra settings, but this isn't working. Actually, yes it is. We just have to increase the span here. Usually it does this as a default, but I guess we need to go a bit higher. 20 is fine. And then what I want to do is I want to hop into the top view. And as a matter of fact, let's increase the span until one of these vertices are perfectly in the center. It should have done this by default, but I guess I wasn't as lucky with it. Gonna kind of rotate this. There we go. So now we should have something in the center, I think. This will be good enough. This is not really a big deal. Okay, awesome. I think we have some overlapping verts here, so we'll go ahead and merge these by distance. And now we should have a perfectly centered vertex here in the middle. And now what I can do is go up here to proportional editing, turn this on, turn on the sphere fall off, and then if I press the G key and grab it and press the Z key, I can make like this little button effect or something. You can kind of see how the middle's a bit wider or whatever. We can smooth it out. We can even run a subdivision surface modifier to make it even smoother. And now we kind of have like a button effect like this. Pretty cool. So what I want to do is move this down. We could even scale this. Let's right click to set the origin to the geometry. Scale this a bit on the Z and try to tuck it in. And as you can see, we might need to move this down below the surface. If it's above the baking surface, it will not bake properly. So make sure it's below that world origin point. And now we can just simply capture the rest by moving this face down a bit. Make sure you turn off proportional editing so it don't affect the surrounding geo. Move it to about here, and now we should have a little button here that we can bake without issue. Pretty awesome. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and join these two together. Control J. We'll make a nice little bevel around the border here. Really ramp that up. And let's go ahead and try to bake this thing. We'll go into the machine panel, give it a default bake, see how it looks. Go ahead and go into material view. And it looks like we have some issues with the outer border. And I'm actually glad this happened, because fixing these outer border issues can be quite problematic and a bit annoying. And this parallax also isn't working as expected. So something is actually off here. So what I'm going to recommend you do in this case is let's undo this before we join it together. Here we go. So they're separate. What I would recommend doing in this case is I would delete out this outer plane and I would make a new one from scratch. So what I would do is I'd come in here, I'd add in a plane. Let's make sure the cursor is in the world origin with Shift S. We're going to add in a plane here. And now all we have to do is, like we did on the other decal, we have to steal this outer geometry right here. So we could do this a few ways. We could just Alt-Shift click the entire span of edges, Shift D, and then move it up. And then we're basically going to have a circle here. So we'll fill this in, use this as a boolean, and hopefully we can fix it this way. So we're going to run a difference boolean. Let me hide that. Question is, where did the original decal go? Here it is. Shift D, right click, P to separate by selection. There we go. I think I got rid of the other one by accident. We'll do that. Fill this in with the F key and then extrude it down. And simply Shift N to make sure the normals are calculated properly. There we go. And now we can run our Boolean difference. And we should be able to just connect up these edges without problem. So we're going to go ahead and apply the Boolean here. Join these together with Control J, and now we should be able to, before we do that, let me go ahead and symmetrize this piece so that way the connection points are cleaner, and we'll just press the F key to fill that in. Cool. So if we join these together with Control J, we should be able, I think, we should be able to use a bridge edge loops command. I'm not 100% it'll work, but we'll try. Right click and then bridge edge loops, and it did work. Awesome. So maybe without adding any bevels, let's just try baking this and see if this fixes the problem. This is exactly the process I take to diagnose decal issues, because they happen a lot and oftentimes they're really annoying to deal with. And as you can see, we still have a problem here. So it looks like rebuilding that surface didn't work either. So the next solution, or the next potential fix I would use in this case, is to try baking this thing solo. So extrude this down, just fill it in, and I would try baking this thing right here solo. Let's make sure these aren't joined together. So we'll just extrude these down and just bake the outer plane. And if the outer plane doesn't bake properly, then you know the outer plane is the issue and the actual decal is not the culprit. So what we're going to do is create a simple decal just of the outer plane, not of the decal, and see if this works. There you go. And as you can see, it actually isn't the outer plane causing problems. It looks like it's the actual decal that's being a bit of a nuisance here. So we're going to have to fix that. So a nice and simple solution would be to just take this decal and use it as a subset decal, which means you have two separate selections. That would be a subset decal. So we could select the decal, shift click the outer plane, and then create a subset decal this way. Not really an issue doing it this way, it's just that you'll have an extra material slot, which is kind of a waste. Anyways, we can go into material view here, and you're going to see we have this button, and now we actually have a functioning decal. It works fine. So this is probably the best and easiest solution. And the other solution, if you wanted to keep it as a simple decal, which would have been more ideal just to make sure we have only one material slot, we'd have to keep going through the process of elimination, figuring out what in the world is causing this issue. So what we could try doing is, like as a first step, scaling this down just a bit, like that. We'll just move it down to the floor. Actually, it's already at the floor, just the bottom ones. And we could just kind of leave this floating, or we could even just leave it where it was and just leave it floating there with no sort of connection and join it together this way and see if that works. There's so many different solutions here to fix these problems that I'm trying to go through some of the different ones. As you can see, that one fixed it. So a simple solution in this case would have been to not actually connect up the decal, but to leave the decal as a separate entity and simply join the decal to the outer plane even though they're separate surfaces. So in this case, it looks like that one fixed the problem, fortunately. We also don't need this extra space here on the bottom, so we'll move that up a bit. And we'll go ahead and bake this. Just make sure one more time it bakes fine. And there you go. Perfect decal. So since we know it works fine, we can actually bake at the maximum resolution here. Let me sharpen this thing, make sure we have no ridges on that. And we can bake this at 4 times anti-aliasing, 1024 resolution, and you're going to see this decal will come out a lot cleaner. It might take a few minutes depending on your system, so I'm going to go ahead and bake it and pause the video. Okay, so we're going to go into material view, and you can see this decal is a much cleaner bake. It looks smoother, cleaner, less jaggedy edges from the anti-aliasing because we baked it higher. Basically everything's better about it. And for you guys that want to make your own decal packs, you absolutely need to bake at the highest settings. There's just no excuse not to. If you want to have a quality pack and beat any competition out there for decal. I mean, even on our Patreon, which we give away 20 for $2. That's really cheap. We're baking at the maximum settings. So make sure you guys bake at that setting because it's just very important. And usually what I do at this point is I just adjust it by pressing the adjust button and then the D key to adjust the height. And you can adjust the parallax here. Usually I make it just a bit lower until the parallax becomes pretty obvious, like down here. It's already pretty obvious, so I don't want to move it down too low. But usually when you project this onto a surface, it won't be that bad. Let's go ahead and try it. So we'll add in a sphere. Give the sphere a material, and if we go in here, you can see that nasty parallax right here, but if we project it, it should actually be a bit better. Yeah, it's not too bad. We can do another one, scale it down. A little bit harder to see here, but once you project it, it's basically gone. So you don't have to worry too much about it, but I would recommend being careful with how much you move down that parallax amount. Very important. Let's do a bit of a trickier one here. This is going to be one that kind of goes down at a slant, and usually the parallax in these cases can be a bit tricky. As you can see, it kind of pulls more from the middle. But these are pretty good exercises because you will have situations in which parallax is much more focused in a different area as opposed to a tighter area. So let's do something like this. Alright, so first things first, what I think I'm going to do is just move this over so that way I have reference to that one, so I'm making the same one. We'll just start with the plane on this one. This one will be really easy to do actually. So we'll start with the plane, perhaps we'll scale this a bit on the Y. Doesn't have to be super big or anything. And make sure you apply your scale whenever you scale something, very important, just so that way when you run a bevel it's not biased or anything. Even though HardOp should apply it by default, but I always apply it to be safe. Now we'll just hop into our box cutter tool, turn on snapping, and just hold control. And if we hold control, it'll kind of pan out, and then we release control, or hold alt rather. We should be able to kind of cut into here and just get something like this, nothing crazy. And I'll press B to bevel, give this a very, actually, you know what? Maybe we won't do a bevel yet, just run a regular cut here. And then maybe I'll just scale this up just a bit with ever scroll. Something like that. Alright, I'll press Shift 3 to hide the cutters collection. And essentially what we need to do here is apply Smart Apply, Alt click, and then we'll just notice how these connection points are in the corners. We can make this a bit cleaner by pressing Alt X and then running a symmetry. So if we just run a symmetry, it'll actually just run these lines straight through the middle in which case we can dissolve these, or if that doesn't work, just press the F key in face mode and we'll get something like that. I'm not too sure why I was in material mode, but oh, because of that thing. But we'll go into solid view so it's easier. And now what I want to do is Alt Shift click to select both these areas, E to extrude down, press the F key to fill, move this up a bit. And at this point, I'm just going to run a lot of loop cuts in here. Let's go into top view. And what we can actually do is come in here with the dice tool and really just dice this thing up so we have a lot of geo in here. Now, let me see. Is this going to be problematic? I don't think so. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any overlap with one of these edges here. And at this point, we can basically, if I were to just select this set of edges, for example, I could... Well, first things first, we're going to want to only affect this area. So let me control click, select this area, Shift H to hide everything else. And now if we go to this edge, we can press O for proportional editing and basically just kind of slide this down. Now I would recommend using the sphere fall off. Be a bit cleaner that way. And then Alt H will bring that back. And then we can just kind of cheat the system. Move this back up and turn proportional editing off. And then we're going to have like a little indentation like this. Now this is a bit of an issue. Let me go ahead and go into vertex snap. Press G, Z, and then snap it here. And then we can just symmetrize across. It's easier that way. And now we kind of have the effect we're going for. There's a few different ways we could have done this. Maybe there's an easier one that I just wasn't thinking of. But, you know, this gets the job done. And now we can really, you know, scale this on the Z or something and kind of adjust how much this is bending and get it right where we want it. Now this is pretty good. Alright, so at this point we can go ahead and let me press Control tilde to turn on hard and normals and then just bevel. Give a nice little bevel in there. And we're just going to make sure there's not any artifacts or anything weird popping up, which I don't think there is. Looks good, so let's go ahead and just bake this, do a test bake. So once again we'll just do the lower resolution settings, create simple decal, and we can hopefully get the correct result here. Yep, there we go. So now we have a decal that kind of bends down like that. Pretty cool. Now we are going to need a higher level bake because right now it's not very clean. So just since we've confirmed that it works, we'll go ahead and do a maximum level bake here and then create the decal. Alright, here we go. Pretty quick bake, and now as you can see this is a lot cleaner. Now compared to this one, it's a bit different because this one was actually bent down more or moved down more. And we could most definitely give an effect like that if we wanted to. For example, what I could do is, let me remove the bevel. I could make this a bit more exciting by perhaps dissolving, if it'll actually select, Control X to dissolve this area, and then give a nice bevel right here. Just really ramp that up. And then I can just Alt X, symmetrize by holding Shift, and then I kind of get a bevel like that. You know, there's a few different ways you get cool effects. We could also come in here and move this down a bit more. That'll kind of give us some more parallax room. And then of course we could bevel. Let's do a pretty big bevel on this one. And now we'll have a similar result to what we have here. So it just kind of depends on how far down moved in this area is, the hole, and you know, different bevels you have going on. You can make any sort of design you want, just to make sure you don't have any artifacts, otherwise you will get these nasty baking issues. Alright, and we'll go ahead and take a look. And now as you can see, we have a bit more parallax kind of working its way down, which is really cool. So we could, we don't want to go too far on this one, otherwise it is going to go crazy. Keep in mind that if you project this onto a rounded surface, you will be able to get away with a bit more parallax, but in general, I start at the top, I go to adjust, I press the D key, move it up, and then I essentially move this down just until I really start seeing the stretching. So we'll do right here. That'll be good. And then if we just go into quad sphere or regular sphere, quad spheres might not come with your Blender unless you have a mesh machine, in which case you should have this option. If not, I would just use a UV sphere or something. And now what we can do is just add a material on here. Duplicate this. And then just go ahead and project it and see how it looks. Now as you can see, we kind of have like this indentation going down. We can adjust the parallax some more if we want to. But that's generally how you could do a indented decal like that. And now we kind of have something that looks like geo, even though it's not actually geo. Pretty cool. Alright, so let's make one more decal here. I think that'll be enough to kind of get the gist of how to make these things. And what I think we'll do is showcase it, show you some cool looking ways to kind of display your decals in the case you make your own. So here's the last one. I was actually really a fan of this one because, let me show you. Usually what I do with these is I'm just testing them on cylinders with like 100 edges, RY90, and then usually if you project them on there and run a radial array, you can get a really good idea of how these decals actually look, and that's precisely the effect I'm going for. So what I think I'll do is move it over here, scale this down. Oops, wrong one. We'll make this a bit darker. And then I can essentially, you know, do something like this. We'll project it. I always alt-click on project so that way we get a little bit of a buffer. So it's not technically on there. It is floating a bit above the surface, so that way there's no Z fighting. Anyway, yeah, there is, but that's, from a distance there is, but that's usually the clipping. And you could always reduce the clipping to avoid that situation. Anyways, we don't really need to worry about that. So what I'm going to do here is join these two together with Control J. And then what I think I'll do is run a radial array, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then Control click on radial array, press X a few times, and that was the wrong one. I have to select this guy. And then we'll kind of have this effect, and then we can run an additional array. And this is usually how I'm previewing the decals to see how they look. So in the case they're kind of like cut off, what you have to do is shift click on the adjust button. That'll kind of move it out a little bit. Now you can kind of see exactly how these things look. They look three-dimensional. They look like actual geo on the object. And this is generally the best way to test your decals. But without further ado, what I think we'll do is create that decal from scratch. Just wanted to show you that real quick. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, let me add in, or you know what, I can remember what it looks like. Let me start with a square cutter. We'll go to snap and hold Control. And then if I just pan out and hold the Alt key, I can actually make it about this size. And then bevel it like that. Double click. And then all we need to do is take these two edges right here and scale them in, so that way we don't have too much of a border. There's just no need. And then Control click on sharpen. Let me turn screencast keys back on. And you know what, actually before we apply that boolean, it might be a good idea to simply run a symmetry. So Alt X, symmetry, across this axis. So now when we Control click on sharpen, the connection points will be here and here instead of at a tangent direction. Alright, so I'm going to Alt Shift click on both these edges here, extrude it down, press F to fill it, and then we'll go ahead and, let me think. Let's Alt Shift click this upper area and run a little chamfer, so Control B. That should be enough, and then what we'll do is click on sharpen to kind of sharpen that area. And now what I want to do is select this interior face, and we'll shift click on curve extract to basically add in an extrusion upwards. Now before we do that, I actually want to inset this. So let me press I to inset so we have a little bit of a buffer. And then we'll shift click on curve extract. Like that. And now we kind of have that same effect. Now we want to make sure this isn't hovering above the plane. It has to be slightly below that point, which it is. So make sure it's not like above here, otherwise it will not bake properly. You have to make sure it's below that origin point. So we have that. Let's go ahead and just apply that modifier so that way we have access to this upper face. And then simply hit it with a Control B to bevel. Then we're going to have that effect, and this is basically what I had. I always like to add in one extra layer of beveling just on the chamfers to kind of make it a bit more realistic. So you can do one here, and then you can do one here. It's very subtle, but it does look pretty good. And yeah, at this point you could add in additional detail if you wanted to. You could add in like a cut in here, or really do whatever you want. It's up to you. I just wanted very basic ridge decals, so I didn't go too hard on the decals. I thought these were nice and simple. Anyways, what I want to do for the last step is join these together. So select this, shift click on this, and then Control J. It'll overwrite the bevel and just share the same data, so the same amount on the bevel. So this size might change a bit, no biggie. And then we just have to go into machine and bake this. So 2 times 256, we'll do just that as a test and create the simple decal. And then if we just hop into material view, you can see, well, not a perfect bake, we have to do the higher resolution, but in terms of shading and the transparency on the border, this is a perfect bake. We could probably make the border even smaller, to be honest, because the smaller these borders are, the more they can kind of overlap with each other. So I'm going to try here, and then right there. This should be enough. You don't usually have to get it too big. Go ahead and check it. Yep, no problems there. And anyways, at this point, now that we know it works, we can of course do our 4 times 1024 bake. And I don't think we need to adjust anything else because we don't really have any emission settings or things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a simple decal. Alright, so looks like we have a pretty clean bake here. And this is why I love simple decals, because honestly, simple decals, I mean, they are called simple decals, but that's not what I meant by simple. When I say simple, I mean just very basic designs, because oftentimes the basic designs hold the most power, because usually we don't want more complex detail on top of already complex model detail. So that's why I made this pack for you guys for this month. Well, Ryu and I did, and I think it'll be pretty useful to you. So at this point, you can, of course, add this to your decal library. You should have already seen how to do that. You could just make a new decal library here by going to Preferences, going to Decal Machine, and then simply adding in if you go to the bottom, you can create an empty library here, just name it, and then it'll pop up in here, and then you can simply add that in. Anyways, I think we've made enough decals here, so what I want to do is show you a cool little way to kind of present these decals in the case you make some own ridges of your own. So you may have seen this at the beginning of the tutorial series. I already made this, so I'm just going to delete it. What I do want to show you is a cool way to display it. So we're going to add in a cylinder. We'll do 100 vertices. Let me put it in the center of the grid, and then we'll just go ahead and sharpen it. We'll give this a nice material, the one I had before. And at this point, what I want to do is kind of make like a movable pipe of some sort, like a curvy one. So we're going to add a curve. We're going to go to Path. We're going to rotate this 90 degrees around the Z. Just going to kind of make a cool little design like that. Doesn't have to be anything too complex, just, do what you want to do. Okay, so now we have that, and basically we have to take the cylinder and kind of map it to the curve. So if we select the cylinder and the curve, we can press the Q key and then go to Curve Modifier. Now you're going to see it doesn't really bend nicely. If we were to move this, and the best way to move this is to go into Edit Mode, turn on this little button in the curve settings so we can see the preview. You're going to see it doesn't bend very well as we go up that Z axis, and that's because we need a lot more geometry for it to deform with. So I'm going to really ramp that up, and you're going to see that already makes it curve a bit better. I guess I can't undo it there, but you should have seen it made it curve a bit better. And now if I move this up, it has these nice curves kind of going around it, and we can basically scale this a bit on the Z, and there you go. Looks pretty good. So before I do anything, what I would like to do is, let me delete that curve modifier. I would like to add some ridges on here. So what I'm going to do is find my ridge pack, and I'm going to use these right here. Let me go ahead and move the cursor to selected. I'm going to project this. I'm going to array it. That should be good enough. And then I'm going to run a radial array by control clicking on radial array. Now we're going to have to scroll this down. Eventually they are going to overlap and kind of cause some distortion, so we might need to adjust those a bit. Anyways, now we have that effect. We could move it down maybe. We're going to have to do it in edit mode though because it's projected. Cool, and then what I think I'll do is basically just smart apply both of these and then join them together just because I'm done with it. And now we can actually use that curve modifier and move this up along that axis. So we'll just go into edit mode, turn this button on to preview it, and now I can actually move this along here. Even better, I could run an array modifier, so I could add curve and then run an array after it. So we're gonna basically let me just do it manually. We're gonna put the curve, before it, and we're gonna need to do 0, 0, 1, and now it should array along that Z deformation axis. So you basically just want these to match, Z and Z, and we can make this a little bit more expanded. And now we have this really cool type of effect going on along this wire, which is awesome. This is a really cool way to kind of display your decals and, you know, get some good thumbnails whenever you're trying to showcase what you have created. What I do want to do is drop a small bevel on here. Yep, and there we go. Maybe I could even get a bit creative and run a little chamfer on there as well. But anyways, looks pretty good. So I think that'll do it. I really wanted to get a video out for you guys this month, kind of showcasing the decal pack. So that way you not only get the decal pack, but you also get some tutorials on how to make different decals, create them yourself, sell them, give them away, whatever you want to do. And not to mention, if you need to make decals that don't exist, you should have the ability to make those on your own as well, which is very important because there's only so many decal packs out there on the market. So hope the video helped. Hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't watched it yet, make sure you watch Ryu's helmet tutorial for this month. That'll be the actual full-on modeling tutorial if you want to create something and have a finished product. So go ahead and watch his. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon.